Hello and welcome back to Bioclass Bites. In this video, we're going to talk about origin of life on Earth. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. These are the unit and lesson titles for this video playlist. We have Origin of Life on Earth, Characteristics of Life, Theories about the Origin of Life, Chemical Evolution, Miller-Urey Experiment, and Unifying Themes in the Study of Life. In this video, we're going to focus on Origin of Life on Earth and Characteristics of Life. As an introduction, I recommend that you watch this video, time-lapse of the entire universe. I will provide the link in the description below. I recommend that you visit this website from Science Alert. This is a timeline that shows the entire history of the Earth and how it could possibly end. I will provide the link in the description below. Now, this video has already been featured in our previous videos, but I still recommend that you review this video on why is there life on Earth from Open Mind. I'll provide the link also in the description below. Now, just to summarize, so we have already tackled this in the previous series on what makes it what are the factors that make it possible for life to exist on our planet. So basically, we have that proper distance from the sun. We are found along that Goldilocks region wherein it's not too hot, the region is not too hot and not too cold enough for liquid water to exist. We have a magnetic core that protects us from very harmful magnetic cosmic radiation. We have an atmosphere uh, that 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 now mostly has oxygen, making it possible for organisms to perform aerobic respiration. And we have water, and mostly water in liquid state. Water can also exist in solid state in our planet. And of course, again, vast supply of oxygen for mostly living things who perform aerobic respiration or those who require oxygen. In the previous videos, I have already recommended this interactive website from BBC Earth, the 25 biggest turning points in Earth's history, but I recommend that you revisit this because this will only emphasize what we will discuss all throughout this video. So again, I'll provide the link in the description below. So we have already established the age of our planet. So that's 1/3 of the age of the universe. So that's around 4.6 billion years ago. Okay, so the Earth is around 4.6 billion years old, and initial results suggest that life on our planet appeared around 4 billion years ago, and those were the microscopic single-celled organism shown here. So the first life forms that appeared on our planet were actually prokaryotic organisms. It means that they do not have a nucleus, and then after millions of years of evolution, they eventually become eukaryotic organisms, or those cells that contain nucleus. So the earliest life forms were prokaryotic, and they were the ones who are responsible for this ample supply of oxygen in our planet and for the creation of the ozone layer. So they were possibly here as early as 3.8 or 4 billion years ago. So these are our ancestors, this microscopic organisms, and they are still around today. Okay, some of their descendants are still around today, and they are the ones. They are considered our ancestors, and from then, evolution gradually produced the complexity of and diversity of life we have today. Okay. However, the evolution of living things did not really go that smoothly. A lot of times, our Earth has undergone mass extinctions. We had 5 mass extinctions in the past, and life eventually, even if most of the organisms then perished for 5 times, life found a way to continue to evolve to adapt to the new environment. So we've also tackled the relationship between geology and biology, that whatever changes are happening on the Earth's surface, it has direct implication, direct impact, direct consequences on the living things above it. So the movement of the continents, the ice age, melting of ice caps, and the rise and fall of the sea levels were all contributing factors to how life evolved during those times. Okay, so 5 times the Earth living things went extinct. So we define extinction as when a species, okay, so by the way, people, a species is always in plural form. So it always has letter S, even if you're just talking about a single species. So a single species or a species is a group of organisms that are so closely related that they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So that's just one of the many definitions of species. So we define extinction as that moment when a species, an entire species, dies out and no members can actually reproduce to create offspring. So if these are the last two members of the species and then they happen to die, then they're considered extinct. Or if this is the only remaining male or the only remaining female with no one to reproduce with, then we can say that the species is already extinct. So it has happened for 5 times, but life on Earth was persistent, and life on Earth was able to come back after those mass extinctions. I hope you still remember our lesson on history of the Earth, specifically the geologic time scale. So this is one way to visualize the geologic time scale. So if we are going to divide the Earth's history and project it into a 24-hour day, so 24 hours in a day, if we are going to project and plot the different events that happened all throughout those 4.6 billion years. These are the significant events that we can actually visualize and imagine. So at around 3 o'clock or 2:45 a.m., that's the first those are the first earth rocks wherein the molten lava or molten magma of the primitive earth eventually cooled down to become rock. So that happened around 2:45, and then at around between 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock a.m. of that day, those were the times when the first prokaryotes appeared. So our prokaryotic photosynthetic ancestors possibly appeared. But nothing much happened for how many billions of years, for how many hours in our 24-hour projection. But sometime around 12 noon of that day, that's the accumulation of free oxygen. So our ancestral prokaryotes, our photosynthetic prokaryotes, managed to actually produce enough oxygen to create that layer of oxygen in our atmosphere. Then at around 1 to 2:30 in the afternoon is the appearance of the first prokaryotes. So nothing much happened from this time, the prokaryotic cells, into up to this time. Nothing much happened until the appearance of the first prokaryotes, and then nothing much happened for 1, 2, 3, 4 for almost 5 hours of that projection, or for that period in the geologic time scale. Nothing much happened, but sometime at around 6:30 at night, the first multicellular organisms appeared. And around 7, the first animals appeared. Imagine from microscopic, now we have multicellular organisms, and now we have the first animals. Okay? But those are not, not your huge animals. These are mostly crustaceans, mostly um, what do you call this, primitive forms of animals. And then nothing much happened again until around 10 o'clock that night, wherein there's the invasion of plants because most of the for most of this time they mostly stayed in water, but at around 10 o'clock p.m. of that projection day, they started to invade our lands and eventually produce the first flowers at around 11 o'clock. Okay? And then at 11:59 and 40 minutes of that night, before it turns 12 to complete the 24-hour projection, is when our species appeared. So Homo sapiens, humans, even the other human species were actually a very young species. Okay? We just appeared a minute before the completion of the 24-hour projection. We just appeared a minute before the present time. I think I mentioned this before that our species is only 200,000 years old. That's nothing compared to the age of reptiles, age of plants, of other animals, of other species. Snakes are older than us. Other reptiles are older than us. Dinosaurs are older than our species. We just appeared right here, right before the end of that 24-hour projection, right before the present time. So if you're wondering, how come is we only have 2,000 years? Well, that's 2,000 years Anno Domini after it was established that year zero or year one was the death of Christ. But we have hundreds and thousands and billions of years before that. And our species, we only appeared 200,000 years ago. Okay? So that's how young our species is. That's how old the Earth actually is. So we started out 24 hours ago, almost 24 hours ago in this projection, and then this is our current situation, current age right now. To help you prepare for the rest of this unit, I recommend that you watch this video from TED-Ed entitled The Mysterious Origins of Life on Earth. I'll provide the link in the description below. Now, as you watch this video, please take note of the important concepts that will be mentioned so that as we go along, these concepts will be more familiar to you. There are many great scientists from the past, those who are working on it right now, and those who will devote their lives in the future, no? Who will attempt to explain how life may have originated on our planet, okay? Even if there are very little things that we are quite sure of, and there are a lot more to explore, new hypotheses are being proposed constantly, and the old ones are being reevaluated as we move forward in this field of science. Now, that's okay because that's actually the nature of science. That's the nature of this scientific method. Now, just to recap now on how the scientific method works, um, let's humor me even for this part of the video. So, what scientists want to know is how stuff happened in the past. Okay, the origin of the universe, the origin of life on Earth, what is life, how do we define it, how we evolved from simpler organisms, and how our planet was formed. So these are the things that we want to know, and they happened billions and billions of years ago. However, even if we cannot go back in time, even if we cannot travel back in time, we are surrounded with evidence. Okay? Cosmic microwave background radiation, fossils, homologous structures of living organisms. We see continental drift, we see seafloor spreading, we see ecological and evolutionary relationships of organisms. So we are surrounded by this evidence. So what scientists do is to look for those pieces of evidence, to gather data, and to analyze them using a research and by conducting experiments. So we want to know what happened, we have pieces of evidence, we just have to look for them and analyze them. So after analysis of those pieces of evidence and their data, what scientists do is to come up with theories, okay? Unifying theories possibly to connect those pieces of evidence to the phenomenon being studied. So in our case, the origin of life on our planet. So they come up, what scientists do is to come up with theories to try to explain what these pieces of evidence possibly mean. Now, this part is what people usually forget. After after discovering their findings, what scientists do next is to present their findings, the results of their research to the scientific community so that it will be dissected, probed into, sometimes approved or sometimes disproved or sometimes even ignored. Okay? If and only if a finding is deemed worthy of attention, it will undergo numerous tests, experiments, and replications. And those could take years and even decades. Sometimes the original researchers have died before their findings were acknowledged by the current scientific community. Now, I want to emphasize this. One thing we have to know is that the scientific community is a tough audience to convince. And that is good. Okay? This is a great way to weed out incorrect or incomplete assumptions. Okay? Um, all the theories, hypotheses, laws, and facts that we have right now are results of this tedious process that I've just mentioned, and we call that the scientific method. Scientists use the method in um, solving this phenomenon, sometimes even solving crimes, okay, in discovering organisms, in exploring the world, exploring the past, and ultimately understanding the universe. So for scientists, for science, for biologists, all the endeavors that they do just starts with a question in mind. But then what follows is that very important trusted method of finding the answer. And we call that science. Okay? So moving forward, no, I hope that you will remember what I've just said, the nature of science, the nature of the scientific method, and how findings are evaluated by the scientific community. Okay? So, the oldest clear evidence of life, we see it here, are microfossils found in ancient rock. Okay, so this is a 3.2-year-old, billion-year-old microfossil found from South Africa. So the evidence that we have right now, microfossils, dates the origin of life on our planet sometime between uh, 3.5 to 3.2 billion years ago. This shows us the conditions of the early Earth, okay? Wherein it proposes how life could possibly have started in our planet, okay? So these are the raw materials for the initial type of organisms that possibly existed billions and billions of years ago. So raw materials could have come from hydrothermal deep sea vents, okay? So these are cracks on the oceanic crust, and it is being heated by the magma chambers underneath, okay, and spewing out of this vents are very hot, high temperature water that mix with nutrients on the oceanic floor. Another possible source of materials would be the ones coming from the volcanoes, okay, because the earth was still very hot during those periods, and possibly a lot of volcanic eruptions were happening. Raw materials could have also come from the meteorites because our planet was constantly bombarded by extraterrestrial objects back then, okay? Meteorites and others. So they might have brought those possible raw materials that triggered life. And not only those things, but we have a lot of sources of energy during those time. Okay, we are receiving a lot of cosmic and ultraviolet violet radiation, and we have a lot of energy coming from lightning. Okay, during those early Earth climates. Now, this is the conditions of the early Earth. Now, as the Earth cooled, much of the water vapor present in the atmosphere condensed into liquid water, which accumulated on the surface of chemically rich oceans. Okay? Now, this is an image of one of those hydrothermal vents, deep sea hydrothermal vents that I mentioned. Okay, so these vents, so these cracks of the oceanic floor contain hydrocarbons and are full of tiny pores lined with iron and other minerals. So it is possible that the temperature of these parts of the ocean, together with all these hydrocarbons and minerals, were possible catalysts for the development of the early life forms. Okay? So one scenario for the origin of life is that it originated in this dilute, hot, smelly soup of ammonia, formaldehyde, formic acid, um, cyanide, methane, hydrogen sulfide, and organic hydrocarbons. So that's one possible scenario that could explain the origin of life on our planet. Although recent photographs taken by the Hubble Space Telescope have revived the controversy about the age of the universe, what we know for sure is that the Earth formed as a hot mass of molten rock around 4.6 billion years ago. That's what we know for sure. And we have an estimate of 3.2 to 3.5 billion years ago as the possible period of the first type of cells or living organisms that could have existed. Now, we can actually find stromatolites in Australia, and mats of bacterial cells are fossilized and trapped as mineral deposits in these stromatolites. So, what we're trying to say is that the origin of life, okay, dating from these stromatolites, may have taken the right combination of physical events with chemical processes. So that's the current theory right now, that the origin of life from in our planet seems to be the right combination of physical events of the early Earth and the chemical processes of the molecules and compounds present in our water back then. These images show us the stromatolites, and they are the most common Precambrian fossils. So, embedded fossilized within these stromatolites are cyanobacteria, what we know as one of the oldest organisms in our planet. Okay, and these modern stromatolites are exposed and can be seen in Western Australia. Now, this one is a fossil of an ediacaran. These are groups of sea-dwelling animals. So this is their fossil, and this is the reconstruction of these organisms. So they may have come into existence about 600 million years ago. So they are soft-bodied, so they're quite difficult to be preserved, to be fossilized. And they were up to 1 meter in length. And these are the oldest animal fossils that we have discovered. So this is a reconstruction of the seafloor, okay, showing us these ediacaran organisms, okay. So they are found in every continent, okay, except Antarctica. So shown here are organisms that scientists have interpreted as jellyfish, possible jellyfish, flatworms, algae, corals, and others. Now, whether at the ocean's edge or in the hydrothermal sea vents, the consensus among scientists is that life arose spontaneously from these early waters less than 4 billion years ago. So the oldest, we've seen the oldest um, fossils, microfossils of around 3.2, 3.5 billion years ago. So that's what we know right now. So what we are trying to discover as we go along is that how did organisms evolve from water, from just existing molecules that swirled in the early oceans? What triggered the change from molecules into an actual living cell? Now, what comes next after that jump from molecules into um, cells, okay? Ancient or primitive cells. Now, what comes next after that can be best visualized by looking at our geologic time scale. Now, I've mentioned the geologic time scale in our previous lesson, previous unit on history of the Earth, and I've also included this list of videos that you could watch. This will be thoroughly discussed when we go to evolution. But if you're interested, I recommend that you watch these videos. One from TED-Ed, 4 Ways to Understand the Earth's Age. One from PBS Eons, A Brief History of Geologic Time. And another one, NPR's Skunk Bear, Earth's Entire History. I'll provide the links to these videos in the description below. Now, this is actually a task for you to work on, and okay, to help you prepare for the lesson. So, you'll be divided. You were already divided into groups, and then you have to create a concept map based on that segment of the video, specifically from Big Bang to Man, the Cassiopeia project. I'll provide the link in the description below. Okay, so this is quite a um, long video, long documentary, and these are all the lessons. These are all the topics in that said video. So if you happen to be from group 6, then you have to create a concept map based on this topic, dominion of mammals. If you're from group 2, this is what you have to make a concept map on before, during, and after the Cambrian explosion. So you have to watch the entire video in order to understand what I was talking about. This will be your concept map. Okay? So ito, I also recommend that you watch this video, Origin and Evolution of Life. Very good source. I'll provide the link in the description below. This one is from PBS Spacetime. This is from It's Okay to Be Smart, together with PBS Spacetime and EOS. These three, It's Okay to Be Smart, PBS Spacetime, and EOS, these are my favorite YouTube channels. So very, very good science sources. So this one, they're talking about where did life come from JBS Haldane and Alexander Oparin. We will talk more about them as we go along. But watch this video. They're talking about the chemical processes and physical events that occurred on those hydrothermal deep sea vents. Okay, so before we continue, since we are talking about historical development of the concept of life, let's review first the meaning of life and what we mean actually when we use this term. Hopefully, you still remember your lessons in grade 8, because that's when this lesson was tackled. In order for you to answer that question, let's try out this pop quiz. Imagine a situation in which two astronauts encounter a large amorphous blob on the surface of a planet. How would they determine if it is alive or not? What do you think? Pause this video and write down your answers. The astronaut might test the blob for characteristics of life. One of the first things they might do is to see if the blob will move or not. It's because we associate movement with life. We see animals and humans moving around, and they are all considered living things. But we also have plants and mushrooms, sponges, and corals, which remain rooted to their substrate, but they are living things. So movement might not be a good diagnostic of life, because we also see non-living objects such as cloud moving across the sky or a paper being carried by the wind, but they are non-living things. So the criterion for movement might be true for some living things, but it's not sufficient to describe all living things. The astronaut might prod the blob to see if it responds. All living things respond to stimuli. So we see plants growing towards the light. We see animals retreating from pain, such as fire. Humans flinch when there's sudden movement, and all those. However, not all stimuli produce responses. So even if you kick a tree, or you sing to a hibernating bear, or even if you talk to a mushroom growing from a log, you might not solicit any response from them. So, criterion wise, sensitivity could be a good characteristics of living things, but it's still not expressed by every organism, so it might not be adequate to define life. The astronaut might attempt to kill the blob. All living things eventually die no matter how long their lifespan is. We actually have turtles that can live up to 150 years old. We have sharks that can live up to 400. Some sea sponges can live up to 10,000 years, but eventually they die. However, death is not easily distinguished from disorder. One example is a car that breaks down has not died because it was never alive. It is actually quite a circular argument. Um, it's also quite difficult to prove if something is living or not just by killing it. For example, a seed of a tree could remain dormant for many years. However, it only germinates, or it only turns into a plant once you put it on soil. But for the longest time that it is not planted on a soil, it might look to some as already a dead organism. However, it is just in its dormant form. And killing something just to establish that it is a living thing is actually quite counterproductive. So that's not a good test to determine if it is alive or not. So unless one can detect life, death is actually a meaningless concept and quite inadequate in defining organisms. Finally, the astronauts might dissect the blob to see if it is complexly organized. Even all living things are complex, and even the simplest cell could be made up of complicated organelles, as you can see here in this example. Um, However, we also have a lot of non-living things that are also complex in their structure, such as this smartphone. So as you can see, both of these examples are made up of complicated internal structures, but that does not mean that both of them are alive. Thus, complexity might be a good criterion of life, but it is not sufficient to describe all living things because we have non-living things who are also as complex as living organisms. This just brings us to the same question earlier. So what is life? What do we mean when we use this term? Let me present to you what we consider the true criteria of life. So these are conclusive bases that will allow us to determine if something is a living thing or not. So first, it must be made up of cells, one or more cells. Then it must have the ability to grow and metabolize. It must have the ability to reproduce. It must have an ability to maintain its healthy internal environment. And it must have the ability to pass on its genetic information to its offspring and eventually to evolve. Here are some properties of life. Mind you, they vary depending on the source, but they have certain similarities. So first, order, okay? Um, According to this, sunflower illustrates the highly ordered structure that characterizes life. Um, Evolutionary adaptation, we've mentioned that. Adaptations that evolve over countless of generations by reproductive success are the ones that are passed on to the offspring that are best suited to their environment. So regulation, for example here, regulation of blood flow through the blood vessels of this jackrabbit's ears, maintain a constant body temperature, so that refers to homeostasis. So reproduction, okay, organisms are capable of reproducing their own kind. Sometimes they still consider response to environment. For example, Venus flytrap closes in response to environmental stimulus. Then we've mentioned growth and development. So inherited information carried by the gene controls the patterns of growth and development in living organisms and energy processing. So organisms such as this butterfly obtains fuel in the form of nectar and will use chemical energy to power its flight and other work. First is cellular organization. All living things are composed of one or more cells. Organisms that are only made up of one cell is called unicellular, while organisms that are made up of multiple cells are called multicellular. So complex arrangement of molecules make up the organelles of the cell. Then eventually those organelles could become the actual cell. Then cells working together form tissues and so on and so forth. This lesson will be tackled in depth with our next video on levels of organization. So we define cellular organization as having components that could make up a cell and how they are arranged inside of it. So all living things are made up of cells. It's one of the tenets or principles of the cell theory. So here you just have to get a cell sample from an organism, look at it under the microscope and see if it is actually made up of cells. If it is, then we can say that object or creature is actually a living organism. In this illustration or microscope image, we can see here several paramecia, plural of paramecium. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 paramecia here. And inside, they are ingested with several yeast cells. So inside this cell are more cells of yeast. Okay, the yeast that are stained red are enclosed within membrane-bound sacs called digestive vacuoles. So here, this is considered a living thing because it's even if it's a unicellular organism, it's still made up of cells, and inside you can see here multiple yeast cells. All living things have the ability to grow and metabolize. Living things can assimilate energy and use it to grow in a process called metabolism. We define growth as a biological unfolding of events involved in an organism from changing from a simple to a more complex level, as shown here in growth of this plant from seed to a seedling, and development of a human female from a newborn baby into an adult female. All living things are capable of such changes. Also, living things are capable of metabolism or organic processes that they perform that are necessary for life. So examples of those metabolic processes are digestion, respiration, circulation, excretion, reproduction, and others. All living things are capable of reproduction. So reproduction is a fundamental feature of all known life, and each individual organism, such as you and I, are results of reproduction. Some organisms live for a very long time, but no organism can live forever. So therefore, it is important for reproduction to happen in order to perpetuate the species. Examples of reproduction are seen here of two cuttlefish mating. By the way, cuttlefish is my favorite invertebrate because they have such good camouflage abilities, and look at them, they're so cute. Here we also see examples of pollination in plants, either in self-pollination, wherein the plant fertilizes its own egg cell, um, while here in cross-pollination, the pollen will come from the other plant or the other flower to pollinate um, the ovaries. Since all living things die, life without reproduction is impossible. So we can actually conclude that all living things are results of reproduction, and all living things are capable of reproduction. All living things maintain an internal environment different from their surrounding. We call that homeostasis, or a self-regulating process by which an organism tends to maintain stability while adjusting to conditions which are important for its survival. Let's look at the example of crocodiles from the subfamily Crocodylinae. By using temperature variations in their surrounding, or by remaining cold when they do not need to move, reptiles, such as these crocodiles, can save considerable amounts of energy compared to endothermic animals of the same size. Um, in the past, people would classify animals as warm-blooded or cold-blooded. However, there are more appropriate terms for that. In this example, crocodiles are categorized as ectothermic organisms, which means that they maintain their temperature based on the factors outside their body. Like what the description I've mentioned, if their body is too hot, they just have to go to a body of water or to a river or stream, and so that they will be able to cool their body down. And when it is too cold, they just have to sit under the sun, and then their body will become warmer. Unlike humans, which are mammals, which are commonly endothermic animals, we can maintain our own internal heat. For example, we can maintain our own internal temperatures. For example, when it is too hot, our body's reaction is to perspire and release sweat along our skin. So as those droplets of water evaporate, they take with them heat coming from the body. Thus, it cools the body down. And when it's too cold, if you've noticed, our abdominal muscles would tend to rub against each other, which will cause the body to shiver and generate heat specifically for the internal organs to save it from the excessive cold. So organisms use either their own body or the environment to maintain their temperature, and that's just one example of homeostasis. If homeostasis is successful, life continues, the organism survives. If it is unsuccessful, it could lead to disaster, disease, or even death of that organism. All organisms possess a genetic system that is based on a complex linear molecule called DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Because of this, all living things are capable of passing on their traits to the next generation, and that's how we actually define the word heredity. So through heredity, variations between individuals can accumulate over time, and this will eventually cause species to evolve through natural selection. In this image, we have here a pedigree analysis for two traits in humans. The first one is widow's peak. So that's having this shape of your hairline that can be inherited. And if you do not have widow's peak, then you just have this regular hairline. So in this pedigree, we see that the gene for widow's peak is passed on from first generation from the grandparents to the second generation, the parents and the uncles, and then eventually to the third generation, the actual sisters or the actual people that we are looking at. So one of the two sisters inherited the gene for widow's peak, therefore she was able to manifest the phenotype for it. Then another example here is for attached um, earlobe versus free earlobe. So the gene for attached earlobe is present amongst the generation of the grandparents and eventually passed on to the second generation of the parents. And then it was inherited by one of the two sisters having this trait of attached earlobe. So this is an overview on how heredity occurs. Because of heredity and then eventual accumulation of characteristics, evolution accounts for the unity and diversity of life in our planet. So we see here different variations of birds. So we have here hawk, a red-shouldered hawk, okay, a European robin, an American flamingo, and a Gentoo penguin. So even if they are all birds, they have different characteristics, different traits, different physical appearance that allow them to survive in their environment. So these shows us very diverse lifestyles based on their characteristics. So the scientific explanation for the unity, okay, or the connection of all living things and the diversity of all the living things on our planet is best studied through the prism of evolution. Okay, so the adaptations that they eventually have and pass on to their offspring is called evolution, okay, or the gradual process of that is called evolution. So the concept of evolution is that organisms living on Earth today are the modified descendants of their common ancestors. We will learn more about this when we reach this unit in the fourth quarter. So to summarize everything that we have discussed so far, I recommend this video from Amoeba Sisters entitled Characteristics of Life. Linked in will be found in the description below. At this part of our video, I recommend that you also look into this additional resource, Why Learn Biology, because mostly starting from this unit onwards, we will mostly be talking about life sciences. So you might as well watch this video, Why Learn Biology from Study Biology. I'll provide the link in the description below. That ends our video. I hope you learned something new. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. Till next time, goodbye.